So I want to talk a little bit about consistently applied processes. When you talk about building culture, what I would say is there's no rocket science in building a great culture. It really isn't. It's not sophisticated. It's not overly complicated. It is extremely difficult. And what makes it difficult is because you have to stay focused. You have to stay focused year in and year out, and you have to be consistent over and over and over again. So by what I mean by that is we've had a lot of our processes to bring people onto the team. We've had essentially the same process for over 20 years. Now, has it adapted and morphed based on the needs of the reality of the ministry? Of course. But the same fundamentals, the same way we approach it, are the same today. We use many of the same tools that we use. We use a relatively narrow set of tools around self-awareness, focused around self-awareness, things like strength finders or personality or emotional intelligence or just good feedback conversations. And we use a relatively narrow set of tools that we apply broadly, consistently over time. So what we have to resist is the latest and the newest tool, the latest fad, the latest leadership book that's come out. Because what happens is if you're always chasing the latest thing, then what's going to happen is you'll never build deep roots into your culture. You'll never build common language. You'll never build efficacy with the tools that you're using. It will never actually pervade all the different pieces of the organization. And then you'll have silos. And so those things are not helpful in building a life-giving culture. But for that to happen, you have to stay consistent. You have to stay focused. You have to stay somewhat boring in these kinds of things, because to build a high-performing culture, you have to be consistent over time. Consistency over time yields results. And so you have to withhold the urge to go chase the latest thing or the newest thing, because that's always the temptation. And here's what I know to be true. If I was going to introduce a new tool into Life Church as it exists today, it would take me no less than a full calendar year and tremendous effort at every location, at every area in the organization, at every level, to drive that into the culture to where it actually takes roots, to where it's going to actually be sustainable. And so I'm just very sensitive to the fact that, so for something to enter into our culture today, it would have to be clearly a better tool. It would have to be meeting a need that was absolutely clear to us. Otherwise, we wouldn't want to introduce it in the culture, because we understand that it takes so much time. Now, the great thing is if your culture is not clearly as defined, or maybe it's a startup, and you can do those things in a much quicker way. And so that would be a good thing. So again, consistently apply processes over time. All right, now let's just talk a little bit about why this is important. And I want to talk about this in the context of Life Church, but here's the thing that I would say, that no matter what size your ministry is, why this is going to be important to you. Life Church is running about right now close to 800 team members, and we're trending to be 1,000 at some point. But if I brought in, let's say I made mistakes, or we as a team made mistakes with 10 new people that we brought on, and for whatever reason, we just made a mistake, they made a mistake, whatever happened, they just weren't the right fit. You know what? I might not notice. We would probably be able to absorb that mistake into the 800 team members that we have. When we had a team of 5, and I was at Life Church when we had a team of 5, that was all that was on the team. If you make a mistake with one person, that's 20% of your team. And so hiring and understanding why this is important is actually even more critical when you only have 5 team members, or when you're thinking about bringing your very first team member full-time other than yourself onto the team, because you have to begin to understand what's really important to me. What do I want this place to look like? Is this person going to reflect that over the course of time? Is this person going to be able to, are their values aligned with my values? Are their passions aligned with my passions, or our passions? And do they have those attributes that I think are really important? And it's absolutely critical. The smaller you are, the more important this actually is. But for us, what we would say is that is that this is a diagram, a representation of what most organizations are going to look like. So you have the center point here, and it's the most vibrant, deepest color. And then as you move away, it becomes less vibrant, right? And that's what happens in typical cultures. That's what people would say, particularly when you get up into the 800, 900, 1,000 point, is that the further you get away from center, however you want to define center, maybe it's the senior pastor, maybe it's the leadership team, maybe it's geographic, maybe it's a geographic center. You define that however you want. That's not really the important piece of it. There is a center point somewhere. And the further you get away from that, the less vibrant the culture is. And that's typically what happens. And so how do we combat that? Because that's not going to work for us. Another problem is, and what I just mentioned is, so maybe you introduce people that actually aren't they don't have the same passions. They don't have those same values. Somehow they made it into the organization and they're not actually the same as everybody else, right? When I'm talking about the same, I'm talking about the same within vast diversity, right? Based on passions and attributes. And so that's not necessarily a good thing, particularly what I already mentioned, if it's a small ministry or a small church. A team of 5, you can't afford to have these, because there's going to be incredibly disruptive to what's actually happening. And it becomes even worse if these people actually become leaders, because what they do is they bring more of who they are into the organization. And then what you have is you have these silos and they stop working well together. And you say, oh my gosh, what's happened to the culture of our organization? And so you say, okay, well then what would be the solution to it? And how can we ensure this doesn't happen? And this is a challenge that we put to all of our team. And I think it's an important challenge. And it comes from Paul. Philippians 3:17 says, join together in following my example. Brothers and sisters, just as you have us as a model, keep your eyes on those who live as we do. 1 Corinthians 11:1 is, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. So as Christ followers, we should all be willing to accept the challenge and say, look, if you want to understand what it's like to be a follower of Christ, follow me. Not only about you, but sometimes that can be scary, because I realize that I'm not always the very best follower of Christ sometimes, or at least sometimes I feel that way. But the same thing applies to our culture. The same things applies to the expression of values in and through us every day as we approach our work. And the truth of the matter is it doesn't matter what values you have on your walls. It only matters the values that actually happen in the interactions with your team. Those are the only things that it's real. And values are always going to cost us something. And if you don't ever find that it's more expensive, it's more difficult, you have to say no, it costs you a relationship, it costs you a team member. If you can't remember the last time keeping a value actually cost you something, then I would wonder if that was actually a value for you at all. Okay, and so this would be an example of why it's actually important. If every single person on our team, if every single person on your team will accept the challenge and be an accurate representation of your culture, an accurate representation of the passions and the values and the attributes that make up your team, then there is no distance from center point, right? There is no team that has to look far away to find a true representation of the culture. In every team, in every location, there's an example, there's a living example right in front of you. And these are all the same color, but I want to stress that this does not mean homogeny in your team. Our team is incredibly diverse in every way you can imagine. It's got age diversity. It has got ethnic diversity, racial diversity, spiritual diversity. And so these are only the same as it comes to representing the passions and the values and the attributes that we hold true. And that's really what helps us cut through all of the difference and actually unites us around this common mission and purpose that we believe is birthed and ordained as we follow what God has for this ministry and as you follow what God has for your church or your ministry. And that's an incredibly important thing. So that's why it's important. And that's why it's important for every one of your team members to be willing to accept the challenge. Now, what we would do is at Life Church, we would lovingly ask somebody that if you're not willing to do this, if you're fundamentally not willing, or you can't find it in your heart that maybe you're not there today, but you're not interested in being that example for the team. You just don't think that's who you are. Then we would lovingly ask you to consider stepping off of the team. Not because we don't like you, or we actually love you. That's, in my view, it's an act of extreme integrity. And it's really, when I think about it, there is a place that God has for you where that can be true of you. And if that can't be true of you at Life Church, then I want you to be in that place that's the truest expression of God's passions and gifts inside of you. And so that's why we would actually do that. So this is something that we do, and it's important to Life Church, but it's important to every single ministry, no matter how big or how small your team is, that everybody understands exactly what it is, what it means to be part of your team, exactly what those values mean when you live them out every day, and that everybody's committed to being the example and living those values out each and every day. All right, so let me just talk a little bit about what if the culture I have isn't the one I want. I want to understand a little bit. You have to understand where the gravitational pull is. Remember, we had this at the very beginning. We talked about, this is Gallup's snapshot of the workplace in the U.S. in 2019. Let's just talk a little bit about mass, and let's talk a little about gravity, right? Everybody knows that the largest thing and the largest object has the most gravity. So the sun in our solar system has the most gravity. Everything revolves around it. So the largest idea, the largest thought, the largest group of people is going to draw them to themselves. That's what gravity does, right? Gravity pulls things to itself. Whatever is the biggest thing has the biggest pull. Okay, where's the gravitational pull in this? It's to the center. So maybe the 53% that are satisfied are going to draw some of these 13% that way, right? But what's going to also happen is this 34% that are fully engaged, this 34% that work with passion, that perform consistently at high levels, they're going to walk around and realize they're in the minority. They're going to realize, man, do I really have to do this to succeed here? I mean, maybe I shouldn't try to work so hard. I mean, more people don't than do. I mean, over 2/3 of the organization is somewhere in here. I mean, why is that me? And so what you have to do, you have to realize is, where's the organizational pull? Where's the gravitational pull in your culture? And then if it's not where you want it to be, then what I would say to you is you have to put enough energy over time to overcome the gravitational pull of this right here. So you have to bring extraordinary energy for an extended period of time to actually force and shift these people this way. And that's going to happen either through getting these people to believe in a new vision, believe in a new reality, to understand what's expected of them. You need to push that out. And as a combination of bringing new people into your team that are exhibiting the traits and the attributes of what you would want from your very, very best team members. And so understanding your gravitational pull now, when you actually get it working, if we can see the next slide, when you actually get that working, you can see, where does gravitational pull work for us? Because now then, when you move more people where you actually want them to be, then the gravitational pull is going to pull that way. And so what I worry about is, I worry about the 4%. Because if they don't move that way, it's unsustainable to be in this particular point in time in our culture over a period of time. So for a season, somebody could actually be here, either through maybe they're not well. There's a challenge, particularly in their life at that moment in time. Any given day, any one of us can find ourselves here on any given day, but you just can't stay here. And so that's how gravity can work for you, and that's how gravity works against you. So when I talk about, what if the culture isn't what I have isn't what I want, that's an important thing. Understand where the gravitational pull is, and if it's not where you want it to be, you have to understand, how much energy over time am I going to bring to shift it where I need it to be, because I have to overcome that gravity. Let your mission solve your problem. That just understand, man, why do we exist, and what's most important to us. Understand who you are, and then build your values from there. So set those values. I've given you some examples of those different values. And that's the thing I would say is, if you don't have the culture you want, again, let your mission and the values that are deep inside of you, the attributes that you know it's going to take for somebody to sustain over time, bring those things out, identify what those are, and then begin to help your team understand that, and then draw your team around those things. And then as you add people onto your team, then you can also make sure that you add the right people. So these are my thoughts on building a high-performance culture. And I've said already that I do believe that the church should be the standard bearer for culture and in our country and really around the world. And it's not about it's not about recognition. It's not about awards. It is about empowering and motivating our team to accomplish all that God has set in store for us, because there literally is eternity on the line for each and every one of the ministries that we have. Your churches and your ministries are making a tremendous difference, and we have to empower our team to do their very, very best to accomplish all that God has in store for us. So thank you very much, and we're praying for you.